Hello, welcome to Meet the Author. I'm Guy Morris, and we're here today with one of the authors from the Author Event Network, Denise Frisino. She's one of my favorite authors in the group. I'm so glad for this interview. Welcome, Denise. How are you doing?
Such kind words early in this morning. Thank you, Guy.
We haven't even started, and I'm already flirting. There you go.
I love it.
Well, Denise, I know you've been a member of the group for a while. I'm excited about this interview. I know that people are going to love your story. Let's start with what inspired you to become an author and what genre you work in.
I work in historical fiction, and what inspired me was, I think, all of my theater training, because I've been on stage actually since I was 5, so I have about 60-some years. Don't say that out loud, okay? Because when they do the math, then they go, whoa.
X years.
X years, yes. So, and then I happened on a story that I thought no one had known before, which was this first book, Whiskey Cove. It's about Prohibition through our San Juan Islands, and it has a murder mystery in it. But it's told from a woman's perspective. And when I first wrote this in the early 90s, women's books were just beginning to be the thing. So I was working up at Roach Harbor in the San Juans in my early 20s, and a friend of mine who was a fisherman told me that his grandmother had been a rum runner. And I said, oh, honey, you're drunk. Sit down. I'm taking your drink away from you. But I went home, and I told my father, who used to write for the Seattle Post-Intelligencer. He was an editor, day news editor, city desk, etc. And so I didn't think I was a writer, you see. I did theater. That was my father's job. Mine was to do theater. His was to write. But I told him the story. I said, Dad, what do you think of this? Nick says his grandmother was a rum runner. And he says, write the story, Deese. Well, this was before computers. So I had to immerse myself in books. I ran an ad in the newspaper and found people who had lived through that period.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
The senior world. No old newspaper. It had to be the senior world to catch that generation. And so then I interviewed some of them, and the story just evolved, and the storyline developed very quickly, and I moved forward with that book.
Interesting. So how did the murder mystery factor into that?
Well, during Prohibition here in the Washington State area, the mafia did come from back east and try and break in. And our guys were like, no guns, no murders, please, no nothing. And they had to scoot them out, you know, trying not to be too physical. And so that's where it came in. So what I did was I had the head of the mafia who was sent out here to open it be murdered, and you don't know who killed him.
Interesting, interesting. Well, I like to call murder mysteries research.
No kidding.
I'm a thriller writer, so that's you're always trying to figure out how to get ideas.
And you're a great thriller writer, by the way.
Thank you. Well, what do you now? I know that your other books are on World War II. What inspired you to dive into that particular set of stories?
Research. I was researching Whiskey Cove when this gentleman told me basically the storyline. He said, Prohibition's nothing, honey. I was really taken aback. I said, what do you mean? I've been spending all this time. And he told me basically the outline for the trilogy. I only have the first 2 books done, which was that there was a woman who was fluent in Japanese at the University of Washington, but she was Caucasian. And when the FBI learned of her talents, so to speak, they took her, dressed her like a hooker, put her in the bars of San Francisco, and had her listen to the conversation to help them identify where the Japanese spies, the espionage ring was, from Alaska to Mexico. Now, I used to say Canada, but over 11 years, I've interviewed 56 veterans from World War II. Wow. And one of the vets who was stationed in Alaska said, oh, no, dear, they were in Alaska as well. I know where they were. So I had to revamp my statement from, say, Alaska to Mexico.
Interesting. Well, what do you think the key themes of your books are, and what do you think the readers discover when they go through them?
I think it's relationships, it's passion, it's vulnerabilities, lots of history, though. You know, I was with Lieutenant Colonel yesterday, Bobby Flamia, who I taught in middle school. Imagine that one. Here he is. And he said, Miss Frisino, why? He still calls me Miss Frisino. They all do. Miss Frisino, why did you write these books? And I said, Bob, because why did you choose historical fiction as opposed to just doing it as a history book? I said, because I want a broader audience. I think and I also looked at him and said, Bob, I would have had to do footnotes. You know me, I wouldn't have done good with footnotes, But through the theater, you get to develop stronger characters and have them, life and death situations. And you think of the things about spies, which are in these next two books, and your country's at stake, and there's a lot at stake. In Whiskey Cove, there's a lot at stake too, because the murderer is still alive, and they don't know it when they try and unveil who it is.
Okay.
So we have suspense in that one. But in this one, obviously, in Orchids of War, it starts in the summer of 1941, and then it stops at the day of Pearl Harbor, December 7th, 1941. And then this Storms from a Clear Sky picks up literally 5 minutes later, same characters going into both theaters, but it only goes up to 1943.
Okay.
So book 3, which I'm working on now, is will go through the end of the war. I had a girlfriend call me the other day. She texted me and she said, Denise, I just finished Orchids of War. Please don't kill Eddie or the dog.
Especially the dog.
Yeah, do not kill any animals, whatever you do in this book. So I thought that was pretty funny.
Oh, that's hilarious. I was told the same thing from my wife.
Really?
I can kill anybody, but the pets are off limits.
They're sacrosanct.
Yeah, they're sacrosanct. So did you have any personal experiences with your family or anything with World War II, or did that really kind of spark that?
Well, my father served first in Alcan on the Alaska highway, building it in that first winter. It was the fastest built road of its magnitude. And of course, he was freezing. He was Signal Corps, second lieutenant. And then they shipped him to Burma. So then he was in shorts with snakes for the rest of his, time in the war.
Fun.
Yeah. But he never really talked about it, which is, I could just, it's so frustrating. I mean, look at what I'm doing. And did I sit him down and ask him questions? No. And that was it with that generation, is when I do the interviews, I make sure there is no family member around because they will not talk.
I think it's very difficult for people to talk about those types of experiences. I think many of them are still traumatized. Many of them have experiences they don't want to expose their family to. And I think it is hard to talk about those kind of past experiences.
Well, and this war in particular, World War I was obviously face-to-face. But World War II was a lot of that face-to-face, And that's a different kind of war.
Yeah. Yeah, we just push buttons from afar now.
Yeah.
To a great extent.
And let's hope we're not pushing any buttons.
I know you did a lot of research. I want to ask a little bit more about that in a minute. But how much of the stories are based on, with all of the interviews you've done, how much of it is based on true stories?
Thank you for asking that. Excuse me. That's an extremely important aspect of what I do with my characters. Of the 56 men and women that I have interviewed, I take what they did during the service and I implement it into my characters. So my characters will act out what actually happened during the war to, say, Captain Dick McNeese, who was the first man shot at Kaneohe, and he was... what happened to him the night before, why he was sitting at the mess hall that morning to run out on the base at Kaneohe, is exactly what happened to Dick McNeese the night before.
So you're creating fictional characters, but infusing them with factual events.
Absolutely.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
I think that's really important because I think it brings in a lot of authenticity to the story.
Well, if I'm going to write about this subject matter too, of a Nippon spy ring, I better get it straight because a lot is riding on that. And I do want it to be accurate. I want it to be also a means for people to look at this and go, and maybe a leveling and finding some peace in this issue around, what happened with the Japanese on American soil during World War II, because there were some. I mean, I can't imagine thinking of attacking someone as large as the United States without having spies embedded throughout.
Right.
You know.
Right. Well, have you then been able to get responses? Have you had any reactions from the people that you interviewed to the books? Have they read the books and given you their responses?
Oh yes, absolutely,
Okay.
and they love them. They Professor Bob Harmon, Seattle University. Unfortunately, he's no longer with us. I think of the 56, there might be one or two who are still with us, and it's so hard when they pass, because you meet them, you fall in love with them, you hear their stories, you hear the grittiest part of their lives, basically, and then whoosh, they're gone. But, he loved it, and he said, boy, did you do your research, and unfortunately, like for Storms with a Clear Sky, what had happened with one of the women I interviewed, by the time I called to tell her daughter, I'm sending a copy, and she says she just passed. So it was for years. What took so long too was I needed to get the interviews done. That was my priority. But now that they're fewer and far between, I've got more time to write again. But yes, they have really enjoyed their books. My books. Thank you. Asking that question.
Well, tell me more about your process for doing research. Obviously, you're doing a lot of interviews. What other kind of research are you doing, and how are you mingling those two things together?
Not going down a rabbit hole on the internet, when you're looking at things is really important. I read a lot of just history books.
Oh, come on, Denise. Rabbit holes are my favorite thing to do.
How many hours are you going to spend on this one sentence?
Yeah, exactly.
But I read, people always say, well, did you read this book or did you read this book? Which is a fictitious book. And I'll say, no, because I did theater for so long. I have one of those memories, and I'm afraid that if I read somebody else's interpretation.
Fictional, yeah.
Right. I might steal it.
Right.
So I really make sure that what I'm reading are, Nakano or Nakano, The Spies of Japan, or At Dawn We Slept, or, books of that ilk, so that I do it. And then I'm lucky in the sense where I have a timeline I have to follow. I can't mess with that. So what I can do is I can figure out which characters of the men and women I've interviewed were at this, say, D-Day. So I can incorporate what they told me happened at D-Day. Battle of the Bulge over here. The Philippines, when taking back the Philippines. Okinawa. So I can incorporate what happened to them. So right now I'm going through all of my massive stacks of notes and making sure I didn't miss anything.
So that's interesting. So you're actually, you're not focusing on one or two characters and their story throughout. You're actually spreading it around different locations and different characters relative to the timelines of how things are occurring. So when Pearl Harbor happens, for example, you're actually already in 2 or 3 different places telling stories of how people in different locations responded.
Absolutely.
Okay, I love that multiple character kind of approach.
And so it jumps all over, but it's pertinent to the storyline because you have to have that action happening to get either the person home or something happened to them. And so I have right now, I know you do this too, you weave a lot of characters in. I have my 2 main and then 4 or 5 subs, and then their parents and things like that, and how they're responding to a mantle full of pictures of children going off to war, basically. And when she prays and she looks at them, what she's feeling, and the letters that come home.
That's interesting that you're able to take that history, building characters and a lot of emotion into how those characters are responding. I think that has to do with how much interviewing and personal stories you're really kind of baking into that.
I feel an obligation after having spent so much time and gathering so many stories, to really make sure that these men and women are honored. And then at the end, I am hoping to just focus on editing down their interviews. I was lucky. Did I tell you this guy? No one had picked up WorldWar2interviews.com.
Interesting.
And I got it. So I'm slowly feeding what I've already done over on my other web blog. And then when I'm done with the book, I am going to really put in those interviews.
Publish some of the interview notes themselves, the interviews themselves.
And some of the, because most of them are
That's
video.
interesting. That's interesting.
Yeah, so I have that, so that's coming.
I know I like to do a lot of fact versus fiction because I build in so much factual information into my fictional stories. I feel compelled to be transparent. Ultimately, to say, you know, which of this story is fact, how much of this is fiction, and I think it's important to do that because it really differentiates, I think, a lot of the fictional work out there.
Well, and I think it enhances the story and the characters. You know, you write what you know about, and so
how much do you then take these characters, and it's a fictional story, so you've got to have an arc. You know, they have to go someplace. There has to be a conclusion to every story. Tell me about your character development and how you're going through the books. You're going through the scope of the war. Tell me about how you're thinking that you're going to end this, and how's your character development developed? Do you bleed in any fictional elements to those characters to go along with the fact?
Oh yes, absolutely. In fact, they're a combination of several people.
Okay.
You know, it's you know, which is reflective of the time, or reflective of what is, you know, what situation they've gotten into themselves into. But I have a very, very strong woman in here, Billy, and she's always kind of getting into trouble, and so at the end of the first book, she and Jack, the FBI agent, something happens with them, and then you know, you have to have you're right. You have to have the structure of. There's only what 4 or is it 4 or 5 basic stories?
I think there's 8.
Is there 8 now?
There's 8 basic stories.
Yeah, but it's all generally. Boy meets girl, boy loses girl, boy gets girl.
But they're always a 3-act structure. There's
yes.
basically the setting up of the premise, the creation of the conflict, you know, the inciting action or event. You know, there's the setting up of the conflicts, and then there's the resolution of the conflicts.
Yes. Well, at the end of Storms from a Clear Sky, boy, have I gotten some feedback. How could you do that? And then end of Act 2 curtain. You know, you've got to make sure the audience doesn't go home.
That's right.
And so
Luke, you are I'm your father, Luke. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. And so then I had one gentleman who was in his 90s, and we were talking about it, and he just said, "I just bow down to you for the amount of research you've done in this book." And I said, "What'd you think of the ending?" You know. You were alive during that time period. And he said, well, actually, I had to think about it for a minute, but I think you were right on for what would have happened at that point in time.
Well, I want to have one final question. We've only got a few minutes left. Tell us about your process to write. Once you have all this information, how do you go about then deciding what's going to happen and how you're going to write? Is this something that you're doing? Like some people, they get up every day and they write a certain amount of time and a certain amount of hours. Tell us about your process.
Well, first of all, as you know, you don't write. The characters write for you, right? I mean, you sit down and you think you got it under control, and they take you a different way. I try and only write 4 hours a day, because if I do any more, my brain goes crazy.
Okay.
And then I try and exercise afterwards or do something else. And some days that 4 hours is sucked up by that rabbit hole, you know, which is frustrating. I like to leave at an interesting point so that I can't wait to get up the next morning and not look at a blank page, but be excited to continue that interesting point. I always tell people to take acting classes because it gives you characterization, you know, storyline, arcs, pacing, costumes, settings. You know, you learn to
think
hone
about those things.
You learn to cultivate all of those things. So I don't write every day, you know, but I'm working. You're constant. That's the worst thing about writing. Is you're constantly working.
Yeah, yeah.
They don't leave you alone.
Well, research, character development, promotion, you know, just taking care of all of it. It's a full-time gig. Even if you're not
Absolutely.
writing, you're working on the writing.
Absolutely, yeah. So, and as long as you don't give up, that's the most important thing.
Right.
Because you're going to get discouraged, but don't give up. You know, don't let them win.
And once you've finished a draft, do you go back and rework it? How often do you kind of rework your drafts?
No, I'm the kind of writer that needs to move forward, full stop. I might read what I had written the day before, the 4 or 5 pages or however many I got, just to check it for a few things and just to get my brain working. But if I went back and started at the beginning every single time, I wouldn't get anywhere. So I always encourage people, no, move forward, let the story flow. You'll have plenty of time to edit when you're done.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, don't edit full on right away, because you don't know what you're going to put in here. And so you might have to come back and change it anyway. Just let the story evolve first. You know, it's like your first rehearsal.
Right.
Then you go back and add the costumes and the props and everything.
Got it. Well, I have actually, I think, a minute for one final question. Tell me about your experience with Author Event Network and what you enjoy about selling books at events.
It's so much fun. And not only that, you get to work with wonderful people, and you get a lot of exposure. That's most important, and support. So, you know, I think hats off to you. I think it's something that is needed, and it is well done.
Yeah. Do you enjoy, when you're meeting somebody and you're telling them about your books, do you enjoy the reaction that you're getting from the readers?
Yes.
Yeah.
I love doing book clubs and things of that sort, because you get feedback and you get to explain where you grab this piece of information to develop this character. And that's what I love doing, that part of it.
Excellent, excellent. Well, Denise, it's always a pleasure to work with you.
Oh, thank you.
I love having you in the group and selling with you. It's always such a joy to hear your interactions with the audience. And thank you so much for coming to Meet the Author. Wonderful time to spend with you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
So much.
Thanks.
And this is Meet the Author. Thank you so much. We would look forward to hearing from you. If you're an author, an accomplished author with great stories, we'd love to hear from you as well. Have a great day and keep reading.